cool. Let's get started. ठीक है. Okay. कितनों को ये समझ आता है टाइटल क्या है? सबसे पहले मैं हमेशा ये कोशिश करता हूँ कि keep it very simple. आज थोड़ा सा हटके करा. How many of you can guess कि मैंने खुद से लिखा है? ये खुद से नहीं लिखा है यार. Don't worry. The whole point of it was कि जनई आ चुका है. आज how many of you expect कि इसमें मैं AI के बारे में बताऊंगा? किसी के हाथ? Anyone expects AI talk? बढ़िया. Thank you. अगर आपका हाथ खड़ा होता है मैं आपको बाहर भेजता. ये AI का talk नहीं है. Don't worry. This is a pure mobile talk. Okay. So thank you for the introduction. अब थोड़ा बहुत मेरे बारे में भी, just from my perspective. I'm an Android GD. I travel the world. As you can see, ये मेरी इस साल की 52nd flight होगी, जो अब मैं अहमदाबाद से बैंगलोर जाऊंगा. And there are 15 more flights before the year ends. So there are loads more energy that I have to bring, right? Okay. I know it's a very dry state. मैं खुद बैंगलोर से हूँ. I'm a beer enthusiast. मुझे कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. गवर्नमेंट अगर यहाँ आके पुलिस भी भेज दे, कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. I'm still an enthusiast. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, how many of you use Kotlin सबसे पहला? Before I jump into multi-platform और ये सब, ठीक है. और जो फ्लटर वाले थे आज क्या भेज दिया आपने फ्लटर को? इतने सारे फ्लटर वाले थे, सबने बोला Kotlin हाँ. कौन थे फ्लटर? कौन यूज करता है फ्लटर? ओके, एक दो. अच्छा, क्वांटिटी कम हो गई. शर्म आ रही है फ्लटर दिखाने. चलो ठीक है. आज ये हाथ बिल्कुल जीरो कर दूंगा. ठीक है. द होल पॉइंट इज कि हमें Kotlin से उठा के ऐसा ऐप बनाना है जिससे सारी चीजें एक साथ लिखा जाए. ओके. द होल पॉइंट इज कि आई हैव टू टारगेट एंड्रॉइड, आई हैव टू टारगेट iOS, वेब एंड डेस्कटॉप. डोंट वरी, जो पीछे बैठे हुए हैं कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. स्लाइड्स आर जस्ट फॉर एंटरटेनमेंट. यू आर हियर टू लिसन टू मी. ओके. नो, आपने एक पैटर्न देखा होगा. आई हैव यूज्ड टू कलर्स हियर, ब्लू एंड व्हाइट. The whole point is that I'm sharing the logic between the white across all the platforms and blue जो है, it's also shared across all the platforms. So आज का जो talk है, it's about very focused on the bottom line, the views. Now, how many of you know about Jetpack Compose? Yeah, I love this crowd. बढ़िया, nice. Okay. The whole point of this is मैं आपको simple tricks and tips दिखाऊंगा. If you have written even one line of Kotlin or even if you have written one line of Compose, how can we write the same code and start writing for Android and iPhones? मैंने आप सबसे एक सवाल पूछा था. How many of you are Android and iPhones? And I think most of you are Android. How many of you are iPhone? Sorry, एक बार फिर से. मैं भी हाथ खड़े करूंगा. मैं खुद Android GD हूँ. मैं खुद iPhone यूज करता हूँ. So imagine अगर मैं खुद का ऐप बना रहा हूँ. I don't have a test device to run it on. या तो मैं अपने खुद के फोन पे ट्राई करूँ or not, right? But I'm also very naive. I want to write it in Kotlin. That's the goal of this topic. ठीक है? Okay. Now, simple equation, nothing complex. Kotlin का advantage क्या है? You have something called KT files, if you have already worked on it. You write it in a common module. You know what modules are? जिसको नहीं पता, it's simple Gradle folder structure जो आप build systems use करते हो, right? I've written everything inside common. And how many of you know what abstraction and implementation detail is? Pattern होता है, right? Like you say, I expect gulab jamun today, and implementation is you go out, you have your gulab jamuns. The whole point of this is that you write your code once in Kotlin in a common folder, and that becomes shareable across JVM. In Android, everything is Java, correct? When I say Java, it means Java Virtual Machine, JVM. On iPhones, it's or Mac OS, Apple Watch, your Apple Car and so forth, it's all native. And then there is the web side of things. How many of you want to become a full stack? कितने लोगों ने हाँ बोला था यहाँ पे? Okay, थोड़े कम हो गए. कोई बात नहीं, don't worry. आज your hand should be up the whole day because today's entire equation is ki how do I build this UI without going through the hoops of JavaScript or without going through the hoops of React or OSAP Sigma. Okay. All right. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Now the common goal here is ki ye sab modules hain. Whatever I put in box are modules. I'm writing some code in common. I can start targeting JVM, JS and native. How many of you know what native means? Any guesses? Sorry? Okay, iOS, yes. But did you also know you can target web? You can also target Windows. You can also target Linux. All of those things come under native. Native is not from Apple. It's basically something that is hardcore to that specific hardware. Okay? Now, when I talk about this, we'll try to bind it all together, right? You must be wondering, we are all developers, but how does the code look like? How does Kotlin do this magic? Ki maine Kotlin mein code likha and then it goes into JavaScript. Answer is very straightforward. All the gray boxes the gray circle that you see there, that is what the Kotlin compiler looks at. It takes Kotlin code, converts it into the native code of that framework. So if I talk about JS code, which is on the right hand side top corner, Kotlin से JavaScript का वो compilations होते हैं. It's one-to-one mapping. There is no logic of writing an engine. How many of you enjoy writing Dart code? जो Flutter वाले लोग थे. How easy is it to work with Flutter? Exactly right. बहुत सारे एक fluctuations आते हैं. You have a lot of hardware challenges. You have a lot of अरे Dart में ऐसे करना है तो वैसे. This is not a talk about Kotlin versus Flutter. The whole point is there's a huge difference between a concept called cross-platform and multi-platform. Does anyone know what that means? What is cross-platform? Cross is when I say I'm going to stand on the stage and I'm going to speak a language that none of you know, but you have to interface with me. Ta-da, Flutter, Dart, right? But if I say Kotlin, that means it's multi-platform. I write the language code once. It decides how to decompile, compile everything into those native things. Okay. All right. Some of the great companies out there. I know there's a symbol at the bottom. How many of you use GeoCinema? Do you know the entire analytics is powered by Kotlin multi-platform? The web, set-top boxes, Android TV, Apple, everything is controlled by one multi-platform project. It's simple analytics that controls the entire protocol. And there are multiple other companies. How many of you know what Uber is? कितने लोग Uber से आए होंगे? Do you know that they use KMP? There's another one example here. And we know that we had a great keynote today in the morning, right? Do you know that, how many of you use Gmail first of all? Google Drive. हाथ खड़े कर लो, कोई बात नहीं. आज थोड़ा मस्ती करेंगे. Don't worry. Okay. Now, whole point of this is Google also uses KMP. Google Workspace, जो आपका Gmail है, Google Drive है, all of those are KMP driven now. Except Google Pay. How many of you use Google Pay? How many of you use Phone Pay over Google Pay? अरे बहुत कम है. Okay, ठीक है. आपको Flutter को ज़्यादा ही अच्छा लग रहा है. ठीक है. Tell me once you have a chance to try Phone Pay over, say something like Google Pay, you'll realize the differences in performance. And it's not that your developers खराब है, it's just that it's a maturing platform. So all these companies have actually committed to become a Kotlin first kind of a company. Okay. Okay. Today's topic, Compose multi-platform. कोई ज़्यादा code, there's not much code in this particular slide. The whole point of this equation that I'm giving you here is how do we get started with this thing over here? How many of you have seen this GitHub repo first of all? और एक बार try भी करा है. चलो ठीक है. For people who have not tried, I hope I can interest you today. Okay. All right. So कितने लोगों ने बोला we are Android engineers? Okay. How many of you said I am iPhone engineers? खड़े करो. The whole point of this talk is that you can now do all of this. How many of you want to become web developers? How many of you want to do desktop? All of this is now possible with Kotlin. The whole point of this talk is कि if I take Kotlin as a language, as a core, the blue circle that you saw on the previous slides, take that and then compile it further. Okay. Now, आपने बहुत सारे ऐसे designs देखे होंगे अपने time पे, right? You might have come across a designer who says मुझे card ऐसा चाहिए, अगर portrait mode में है, landscape में तो ऐसा चाहिए. Responsive layouts. In the web community, it's called responsive layouts. Now, one pro tip I'll give you is when you talk about Android, correct? Specifically, if you're building native Android or even Flutter, whatever it is, doesn't matter anymore. How many times have you tested your app? Will you push your code to production users without actually seeing कि Pixel device पे ऐसा दिखता है, Samsung पे ऐसा दिखता है, in another phone it looks like that? It's so difficult, right, to test the imaginative screens that we have. Now there are phones that flip, इधर भी flip होता है, ऐसे भी flip होता है. Like there are tablets that are different. Now, if I tell you that when you are a developer, you should be cautious about how responsive your layouts are. Now, when we talk Compose, Compose is great in terms of two things. How many of you know what the definition of Compose is in the first place? Or where the inspiration for Compose came? Anyone knows? Anyone knows the author or the creator of Compose? No? Okay. It came after Flutter. It came after React. The same team that worked on Shift on the Apple side were so happened to be at a same cafe that where Compose team was getting started with. So Google did invest in Compose. It's also a master child of JetBrains, but a lot of the learnings are from React and Flutter. Okay? It's not a bad framework. Flutter is not a bad framework. The challenges are how you do certain things that are native already available to you. How many of you have learned Java in your college days or learning Java? Sorry, I don't even know how many students are here, but okay. How many of you have learned even one concept in Java? If I tell you, now the same concept has to be learned in Dart. 4 साल के बाद बोलूँगा, Dart is now evolving into something new language. How many of you will learn that again? It's impossible, right? The whole challenge is how do you keep consistency? The whole point of this, he's your designer. Different devices, different platforms, different challenges. The goal is to keep it all simplified in a way that you write it once and it should be as responsive as your app. अच्छा, बहुत सारे लोगों ने बोला I have an iPhone. Do you have exclusive apps on iPhone that Android पे नहीं है? आपके दोस्त जलते हैं. Have you ever experienced that? Right? That screenshot that I showed you of my flight history over the last 1 year is not available on Android. But imagine I'm the developer of that app and I want to build it for Android also. But with the fancy, see, Apple ecosystem is very closed source, if you realize, right? Android is a very open source. What that means is there are multiple manufacturers, there are multiple control vectors. If I have to build the same design, ये तो मेरे हाथ में, I'm the developer of this app. So let's see how this goes, okay? A simple equation, this is simple math. We have Shift UI, which is optional if you want to build it for your iOS. If you're doing Compose, you can also do it for web. You can also do it for desktop. Like we saw, we have different nomenclature. We also have Android views. How many of you know that Shift UI is not the only toolkit there, UI toolkit. There's also UI in Shift, correct? I'm very purposefully, मैंने shared UI with Compose multi-platform सबसे ऊपर रखा है. Anyone knows why this diagram is important? Software engineering question. Don't worry, GeoCine was also hiring. A question hota hai. Whoever answers gets a job. Anyone? Or gets a goodie. Okay, good. Exactly, right. The first layer is always the application layer. If you've ever seen an architecture diagram, where is hardware? It's at the very bottom. That's why Android APIs, iOS APIs, core Bluetooth, Android Bluetooth, location, all these things are at the bottom. We are not here to debate कि वो कैसे चलते हैं. The whole point is the middle layer and the top layer. If I'm sharing code, what does that share code looks like? How is MVVM architecture written across both platforms? That is the goal of this diagram. Okay. Now, if I put platform into context, any platform जो Kotlin support करता है, and it's an ever-growing list, by the way. What is going to be shared? How many of you have this question? What is multi-platform? Like, what should I write? Where should I write it? Simple 4 points that you have to remember. Think about your API. Correct? Your backend is still common. You still have one backend engineer or a team of backend engineers that are building your backend APIs. Next, business logic. Things like you would say ki 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. Or if you live in a world where 2 plus 2 is 5, then it's your business logic. Correct? This all goes into a shared logic. This is not Android anymore. This is not iOS anymore. This is not just one platform. It's all. The next important thing is caching strategy. How many of you have databases in your app? Or how many of you use image loading libraries? They're all caches, right? All of that sits in the shared module. Okay? And today's topic is about UI components. Very straightforward. Okay? I have some fancy diagrams, don't worry. ये मैंने खुद से बनाए. I don't know if it's a very kiddish diagram. I hope you will at least get the concept of what I'm trying to show you. Now I have an Android and iPhone. I'm just splitting it into the mobile category. We're all in the mobile track. हम लोग web पे नहीं हैं अभी फिलहाल. But the same principles apply. This is what we do right now. This is the goal that I want to do. All the components sitting at Compose layer, right? जो 3 boxes देख रहे हो, they are the responsible thing that goes into your Compose. But today's generation, all of us that have been learning, have been working in this industry, I've been in this industry for 11 years. I have always kept a bifurcation. Android pe Android team, iPhone pe iPhone team, right? Simple UI. It could be Shift UI, it could be UI toolkit. The whole goal of this is there's approach number 2, where you can share some of the components written in Compose, but you can keep some of your iOS code still as is. You can still call from your Shift UI to that Compose and say, yes, this is what I want. Then there is approach number 3, where everything is shared in one single shared folder. Are you all with me so far? 3 different approaches, okay? Yeah. Now, a very simple design pattern. I have a list, I have a detail. Anyone who doesn't know what list detail pattern is? Nahi? ठीक है, चलो. I thought I'm going to be a college professor today and explain what this does, but ठीक है, I can move on. Now I want to build this app. How do I do this? Now, usually when you think about architecture, you have this onion principle. You might have seen this diagram for clean architecture, MVVM, and like other patterns, right? The goal is composable is your outer layer. All of you agree? The UI is composable. How many of you know that Compose is 2 components? Basically, it's a 2-part library. It's a runtime and then there is UI. Compose runtime is where state management occurs. And Compose UI is responsible for what we're talking about today. Okay? So if I take this principle that I have composable, I also would have some UI states. Loading ho gaya, error ho gaya. Imagine if it rains in Ahmedabad. It's not supposed to, but that's an error state, right? Or if it starts snowing in Ahmedabad. Those are all things that I want to react to, basically, right? Then there is the domain logic. Aapka jo domain hai, right? If I'm building that native app, both for Android and iPhone, I'm loading a list of images and then I'm clicking on it and I'm seeing what are the different hashtags for it. Very simple idea. Sorry, I came up with this at the very last minute. And then there is the data layer, network calls, database, and so forth, right? Bringing these two things back together. These are some of the libraries, don't worry, screenshots, Lena and Lelo, doesn't matter. These are just the beginning of how Compose multi-platform started, or even KMP at first. I just want you to remember one thing, and there's a quiz at the end. You'll get goodies, don't worry. Just look at the number of things that are put up here. These are the early stage libraries. They were all in alpha, beta, and so forth, okay? As we go further, we will evolve. Okay. Now, I know it's an Android conference, but फिर भी iPhones पे आते हैं. If you're an iPhone engineer, if you've ever written Shift code, you would do something like this to do that first screen, list screen. Z-stack, lazy vertical grid, and you would say, I want these images and wait for my repository to give me the images. With me so far, nothing crazy, right? Let's take that apart and put it in Android context also. If you're already writing Compose UI, what is the one thing you would do? You would say set content and you will see a theme and say main view, correct? Oops, yeah. Switching back to iPhone again. What if I tell you that you can also do this content view? This is how you write actual native Shift code. No Compose, no multi-platform, nothing. You have a window group, you say content view. If you're not an iPhone developer, don't worry, nothing crazy. It's just a struct which gets invoked as a main function when your app runs. Nothing crazy, okay? Now the whole goal is to marry them together so that I don't have to go to that Shift developer and say, Arey, what is this here? How do I get this? I don't want to read another documentation, but I'm very good at Kotlin. How do I use it? So this is what the whole goal of this is. So imagine this, Compose view. There's a simple function, there's a class that extends UI controller responsibly, right? I call it representable, you can call it responsibly. The whole goal of this entire thing is that it exposes a content view in an iOS side. By the way, whatever you're seeing here is all the structs, the func with a C, not the Kotlin code. This is all Shift. You're taking this and you're calling it in KMP side, okay? Just want to highlight one thing here. When I'm talking Compose multi-platform, one line that matters the most is Compose view at the bottom. And I'm saying ignore safe area. Anyone knows what ignore safe area means? Yeah? Anyone? Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah, perfect, yeah. Imagine my content is drawn somewhere there. Can anyone of you read over there? No, right? So it's ignoring that. The whole reason is, I want to take control of the presentation itself. I want to take control of the entire screen. My entire projection is to be visible. The reason I do this is so that I can control it further. Okay, now moving on. Now this is the iOS side of code for that exact design that I showed you before. It's as simple as calling this, end of story. Your iOS code, you don't even have to open Xcode anymore. I'm currently writing a Compose multi-platform code. The app will come out very soon. Don't worry, it's travel related. This particular code is from production app that I'm currently building. That's the maximum amount of code that you have to write on Shift. Remember, we are still working with native components. The only difference is that Compose view. Compose view, very purposefully put in green because that's Kotlin. Okay, it's not coming from iOS side. Okay, now how do we do this? How many of you are excited to see what the magic is? Very straightforward, nothing crazy. You must be wondering, okay, components to banali, but how do I render resources? Where do I get the string? Where do I get the font and so forth? The simple math is you write this in your KMP side. In KMP, there are two sides. The actual side and then there is the expect side. Expect ka matlab hota hai, I expect someone to give me a string. Actual is when you go to the Android module or you go to the iOS module or you go to the JS module or you go to the web module and say this is my actual implementation. Correct? Okay. Now what I've done here is that I've taken the actual implementation of the iOS side and say when a font is loaded, how many of you know that Android has a concept called downloadable fonts? You can actually don't have to ship it with your APK, correct? You can also do that with KMP and the benefit now comes to iOS side where I can download it if I want. Right now it's hard-coded resource, but I can also give it an endpoint and it will download that. You can also use a lot of the Android X libraries. Good news for all of us. A lot of the Android X libraries that are very native to Android are also going towards multi-platform. So a lot of the advantages that you already are aware on Android also is available on iOS. Okay, going a little fast now. The whole point is actual here. Okay, it's a KMP definition of what actual is. Now, you must be wondering, how do I structure everything? So the structure of our project would look something in this nature. I would have an Android app where if I don't want to do Compose multi-platform, I still want to stick with my roots, write something in Android itself. The whole point of doing this is कि बहुत complex UIs भी होता है. How many of you build a complex UI and fought with your designer? अरे नहीं ऐसे ही करेंगे. Scroll नहीं चलेगा, drag नहीं कर सकते, and all those. I know fancy demos come up in Google Slides. A lot of the Googlers say ये कर सकते हो, वो कर सकते हो Android 14 पे. How many of you actually gone and tried those animations? Buying a Pixel phone is not the answer, by the way. How many of you you're all developers here today? How many of you actually tried that animation to build it yourself? When you start writing that code, you have tried. Okay, so you know the problem. The problem is it's only available above certain API levels. नीचे के जो लोग हैं उनको कभी नहीं मिलता. And that is where support libraries and all those fancy things come up. Now the beauty of Compose is ये सब is not a it's a platform independent runtime library. I say runtime specifically. Compose का जो state management is completely independent of Android and iOS. Okay. Now when I take the structure further, I'm only going to focus on what shared UI does. Okay. iPhones and Android, आपकी responsibility. If you want to come and enjoy how to write only once and not read about how Shift works, how Android side of the equation works, all your magic sits in this one module. Obviously, we'll have a source folder, and then we'll have something like this, common main. Any guesses what common main would do? Exactly. Everything that you are sharing across different platforms sits in common main. I could have Android, iOS, web, whatever else. For the lack of space at the bottom, I've kept mobile phone only. Okay. So there is build.gradle, simple math, nothing complex. You could do something like this. You say to the plugin, to the Gradle plugin, that I'm a multi-platform module, and these are the dependencies that common will have. Do you notice something very funky here? All the Compose things are now in the main, common main, and everyone else can share. Even iPhones, the source code of iOS main can share it. Okay, this is where the pace picks up. How many of you knew that you can actually write the diagram that I showed you? The math is, you write Kotlin code, it decides whether it's native code, JavaScript code, and so forth, or if it is Android compiler. It triggers that compiler on Kotlin side, second step, and then generates native code. It generates a Z stack. It uses the V. The whole purpose of showing that iPhone code was that it is, all of this is generated by Kotlin. Kotlin actually generates those codes for you. It's not using any engine on top. And then it goes and talks to the UI kit. If you don't know what UI kit is iPhone's, the framework for designing components. Okay, and then finally you get your Compose UI. The whole point of putting Compose UI at the bottom. Any guesses why? No? Okay. The point is Compose UI is at the end because I don't want to interface and say I'm a Flutter engineer. I am trying to give the benefit of the doubt to the native platform key. I am coming and providing you the components. I'm not trying to replace you. And when I get performance issues, only that component will have performance issues, not the entire stack. Imagine using an app where the app takes too long to load because you've used something like React Native or something and there are loads of complicated challenges. Now you don't know how to solve it. So Compose at the bottom is trying to say that this component, if it breaks, it's a Compose problem then. No harm, no foul. If you want, you can replace it with your native view also. Okay, that's the whole goal of this. Okay, some general tips just to ensure some smooth UI. This is going to be exciting. When you work with themes on Compose, there's one particular thing I want to just call out. How many of you know what composition local is or local compositions? Compose folks, anyone? Okay, 2 people, great. Okay, so the idea of Compose is very straightforward. There's something called I'm a provider. Anyone knows what providers are? नहीं आता ना जाके सारे design patterns पढ़ो. Because these are important questions. These are the architectural questions that your job interviews will ask. If someone says I'm a Compose engineer, my first thing would be like, how do you know you're a Compose engineer? Writing code is not enough. How does it actually function? The function is, you might see the composition local provider. It says every time this theme is used, if someone says, what is a window size? Ye room, let's say, I've divided this room into 10 by 10 feet. If I have another one where there is the next room, which is 8 by 10, do you think my UI will behave correctly? No, right? It will not. What I've done is, in my KMP Compose, my theme is telling me what the window size is. By the way, the window size, local window size, is a Material 3 library, KMP friendly, not an Android friendly. We are out of the realm of how Android works. Okay, I take this and then draw it into something like this. So when I say local window, which is a variable, .current, composition local ka matlab hai, it's a variable that your entire Compose tree. How many of you know it's a linked tree? You know what linked trees are? Data structures. I absolutely hate data structures and algorithms in an interview, but it plays wonderful job when you want to build something like Compose. It's a tree where it says I'm the theme. How many of you know what higher order functions are? Okay. Compose works on higher order functions. It's I'm a human being, I'm calling another human being, you can call another human being, and so forth and so forth. I'm not just limited to call you and so forth, right? That is what higher order is. And that's why this is important. That variable local window size is propagated down the tree. If you open a Compose layout inspector, I hope all of you at least know what layout inspectors are. If you open a Compose layout inspector, local window size is available across all the nodes. Imagine building that card with the logo on the left, text on the top, one smaller subtitle. All of those three components will have access to the local window. Okay? Moving further. When I'm talking iOS, Shift UI is calling Compose. Any surprises so far? Any magic show? No, nothing, right? The whole point is my right side is still shared. Earlier, all Android engineers that rose hands. How many of you have written view model repos? सबने लिखा होगा एक बार तो पढ़ा होगा कहीं पे, right? The whole point is it's just moved from Android module into shared module. But we've also introduced our cousin brothers and sisters that are on Shift UI side. We are telling them we are also having our own Compose you can call this. That's the whole magic we have done so far. Okay. Now I have 15 minutes. I'm going to race through this to show you what the magic is all about. Okay. All of us know this pattern. Anyone who doesn't know the pattern? एक बंदा फोटो खींच रहा है. Thank you. आप लोग वापस जाके जरूर पढ़ना. Okay. So this is a simple MVVM pattern. It's a clean architecture. All the principles that you had in mind, how to do architecture, still remain the same. Okay. Let's see how this comes into equation. One thing I just want to call out, there are a few libraries I'm going to call out. Molecule is a great architecture library on KMP side. Not just for Compose, even if you're doing Kotlin multi-platform, without the shared UI, just the shared business logic, a great library out there. There's also something called Moco MVVM. How many of you use architecture components from Android X? What is MVVM pattern, by the way? Yeah, but what is the view model? If I ask you what view model is, it's actually not business logic. Okay, it controls. Is it the library from Google? Is MVVM pattern from Google? Don't worry, this is the kind of answers I get when I talk to even senior engineers. 10-15 saal ke experience wale bhi. It's not the library, it's a pattern. That is what we're doing. So when you think of this direction, right, that you learn the pattern, KMP becomes easy. It's not a library. It's not a library. It's just something that gives you the same benefit to doubt on the KMP side. That's it. Okay. Next. All of us have written some kind of states like these, nothing crazy, loading, success and error, nothing complex, correct? For people who are at the back, I hope all of us are following, right? It's just a simple list of images I'm getting from a server side, nothing crazy, okay? How do I do this in Compose? I will write a molecule view model. I'll write it as an abstract class. See, I am from the I don't come from Gen Z, I don't come from Gen AI, nothing. But I still believe in something called abstraction. How many of you know what abstraction is? Okay, thank God. Okay. Last time I did this talk yesterday in Bangalore, दो हाथ खड़े नहीं हुए थे. And Bangalore is the IT capital of India. Sure. I live in Bangalore and I'm amazed at how many people don't know what abstraction is. Okay. The point here is you're telling to the view model that I will get an event and this is the model I'm going to respond to. Just kept it very, very simple for you guys. Okay. In this, I'm going to write a function called modules. It's a @composable. How many of you know that this will draw UI? Will it draw UI? Will it not draw UI? How many of you say yes, it will draw UI? Look at the code and see how many of you think it will draw UI. Is there any UI components? No. This is the magic I was trying to show you, that Compose is two components, two libraries, runtime and Compose UI. This, I'm saying when Compose comes into equation, anyone who calls that abstract view model will get the three states, loading, error, and success. If the same screen, जो मैंने आपको दिखाया था, images का, if I build a duplicate of it, I don't have to rewrite it again. That's the point. And all of this logic I'm showing you is not part of your Android code. This is in the shared module. You get the point? Now, that's why I can put a @composable. Just putting an annotation @composable does not mean it's a UI function. Okay, unless you have a UI triggered composable component. Okay, moving ahead, there's few image loading libraries. Coil just recently became, how many of you know what Coil is? Anyone with Picasso? Anyone using HTTP client for downloading images, writing your own LRU cache? No? Okay, ठीक है. आपको यहीं पे job offer मिल जाता है if you know what LRU cache is. Okay, anyway, moving on. So there are loads of libraries out there in KMP side that works perfectly fine. Now they're also migrating. There are, I think, When I started with KMP, there were only 4 or 5. The first list I showed you, list of links. Now there are more than 600 plus libraries that I have discovered in the last 24 hours. Before I came to this talk, I have put all of those in the resources, and I'm like, okay, by the time I finish my talk, if I have an assistant, I'll tell him to add more links. That's how complex the world of KMP is growing. Okay. Now, I just want to call out one simple thing. So when you work with any library, even if it is Flutter, even if it is native Android, native iOS, without reading a library definition of what that API does, when I say API, it means something like text. How many of you know that text has something called baseline? Do you know what baselines are? Okay, four or five people. Very, very low. See, this is the point I'm trying to show you. That when we talk about a particular framework, go in depth of the documentation. When I say Kotlin multi-platform pe main aaj engineer ban gaya, it doesn't mean anything. Jack shit. It's literally anda because there's a lot of context in those APIs that are now being built by platform engineers, system engineers. That gives you those APIs to say modifier dot but like drag, button, text. All these things have native implementation detail. Go and read those to understand how to bring the best support on any platform. We're not reading it like an Android engineer. We're now becoming a proper developer that works across platforms. Okay. Now, some animation APIs that are there in Compose. These are also available on Android, but these are now very stable on KMP. If there is something like, I think there is animator status there, but there is one more, like vector drawables or even like SVG. How many of you know iPhones use PDF for images? When you export it from your Figma or other things, there is not a single, you can also export to SVG. But how many of you think Android can input SVG? No. We need PNGs, we need JPEGs, we need some kind of a dot vector file, or we need the .xml file of it. So some of those animations are not natively supported. If you use animated vector drawable, don't migrate it just like that. None of those animations will work. Okay. If I take this simple button, this is a simple compose function, nothing to do with Android, nothing to do with iPhone, just a simple compose animated button. The simple thing that I want to highlight here is animate a state. What it's doing is whenever I click, color should change. Voila, rainbow effect, right? And when I don't click it, it should become blue. Okay? Okay. Someone is very excited about Compose. Yes. Okay. Now, when I do this animation switch, the simple math is that I want animation spec to be twining. Twining is a math concept where it takes 200 milliseconds, that's milliseconds in 200. It draws the color and transits between them. All of this is very natively available across all platforms. Do you see a trick? I said natively available across all platforms. Now, because you're using Compose UI, it's native to anything you touch. Okay? All right, cool. Moving ahead. When we talk about data layer, how many of you write retrofit? Mera retrofit favorite hai. Before retrofit, there was Volley. Oh my God. Mind blown. Best library in the world. Sarcastically, by the way. Okay, coming in KMP side, there's Ktor. How many of you know what Ktor is? Okay, great man. Great audience here. Amazing. Okay, Ktor and Room to suna hoga. SQL Delight. All of these libraries are KMP supportive. So that means I can do something like this. When you think of talking to a server-side logic, retrofit ka jo interface hai, you write @get, you give it a URL and you say these are the parameters, this is the response type. Similarly, I can also do this on the Kotlin multi-platform. Retrofit is an Android library. Yes? No? Okay, ठीक है. खाना सबका पच गया. ठीक है. All are energetic. Great. Okay. If I say retrofit code मुझे iOS में लिखना है, कितने लोग मुझे टमाटर मारोगे? नहीं हो सकता. Retrofit is not Kotlin multi-platform. It's not designed to be like that, and it's not going to be supportive. Ktor is much more powerful. I'm a solo engineer working for a very simple product that I'm building. मुझे backend का कुछ नहीं आता. Like I've built Ruby on Rails here and there, small basic Hello World apps. I'm building my entire backend on Ktor. Everything is in single repo. But just because I have a client also, I can actually use some of the Ktor networking, जैसे date parsing. How many of you know date parsing? जब आपको date मिलता है server से, it'll be in say epoch number or it'll be in some other date format. Imagine doing that library logic in Android and iOS separately. मेहनत है ना बहुत. Now because of KMP, I can use it in single shared module. That's the whole goal of this particular slide. Similarly, I can start using Room or SQL Delight across different platforms. Just be advised, if you're building for web, there's something called WebAssembly. बहुत सारा support नहीं है. It's still in alpha stages. Like I would say, it's still not production friendly. If you're building something on the website, if you're doing something very basic, everything works. But if you have complex data sets, you want to fetch caching strategies that you had written in Android can also be ported over to web. You can actually build www.aditlal.dev. See, plug mera website ka. Do go check out that. That's also KMP driven, by the way. Okay. Next, pixel perfect canvas. When we talk about adaptive layout, जो मैंने पहले point बोला था, just because you're Android engineer does not mean your iPhones will behave the same. Correct? 5 inch ka screen of Android is not equal to 5 inch of screen of iPhones. There's a huge difference of pixel density. There's huge factors of platform. So always remember when you're working with different platforms, there are different APIs. Kotlin is trying to build that native approach. One step it comes in between. It says, oh wait, UIKit or Swift UI has this API. Kotlin will compile it this way and it will get the same results on both. Okay. Instead of you figuring out how the magic works, it does it for you. Witness the power of modifier. How many of you have done .align on modifiers? जो compose पे काम करते हैं. If I write align twice, modify.align, modify.align, क्या होगा? उसी modifier पे. The last one will take precedence. The first align, it's like a last and first out kind of logic, right? You put something in the bottom of your modifier, that becomes the last source of truth. That's the last node. How many of you, that's also a link tree? Do you know that, how many of you have actually gone and read modifier.layout node? Anyone? No? Okay. आज आप लोगों का challenge है. At the end of the talk, there's going to be a quiz. I'll be still in this conference for the rest of the day. If you get 100%, I have a very amazing goodie for you. If you can answer that question. There are a few questions around Kotlin. Let's see if you can answer those. Okay. Anyway, moving on. I have 5 more minutes. I just wanted to kind of highlight. This is not a technical talk. It's just to show you one simple thing. I have a simple box. How many of you know what draggable is? यहाँ से drag करा, यहाँ चिपकाया, यहाँ से उठाया, वहाँ चिपकाया. You can do this on Android and iOS. Just because you have a .draggable. Now they have ported it to multi-platform. Nothing crazy here. Okay. If you don't know how to do this, this is not a talk on Compose. This is a talk on how Compose has gone multi-platform. Okay. All right. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Now I want to just invoke one simple thought. When you think about complexities of UI design, एक सबसे बड़ा चीज मैंने notice करा. Even at GeoCinema, I'm trying to improve that now. How many of you use GeoCinema first of all? Okay. कोई नहीं use करता. YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. Okay. आप लोग कंटेंट कौन सा कंज्यूम करते हो? Spotify, सावन, भाई कोई हाथ ही नहीं, सब लोग डल हो गए. Okay. How many of you know there are some concerts that are happening in India? Who's your favorite artist? Taylor Swift, Coldplay, बहुत से concerts हो रहे हैं अभी. Okay, good. You're with me. Okay. So GeoCinema में, coming back to the video side of things, because that's where I promote my company. The thing is that we wrote, it's a 95% Compose code. Did you know it's a Compose? Performance, anyone has any comments about how the app is? It's bad. I have no problem saying that. We are slowly improving it. One thing we are doing is to break down the components. When I say components, text agar aapne likha hai, it goes into a card goes into a list goes into a screen. Everything is written in one function. It's a bad practice. How many of you know what JavaScript is? Okay, some of you. You have heard of JavaScript, right? Hana, yes. Yes, guys. Back people sab so rahe. Okay, cool. Okay, so when you write everything in one file, what happens? One thing we missed in food today. We got pasta. What is the other Italian food that we really love apart from pizza? Spaghetti. We get a spaghetti code, right? Similarly, if you write everything in Compose in one thing, your state management becomes a nightmare. So break down your complexity. Okay. Next, when you talk about Compose performance, the most important thing is don't assume declarative UI is equal to what you used to do before. Declarative ka matlab hai, if you maintain a state, it's your responsibility to do one or two things. Either state hoist, that's another quiz, that's another thing that you can get a goodie for. If you know what state hoisting is, come and meet me later and I'll see if you know the knowledge. And the other part is that when you write a state, that this compose should react based on this and recompose, that becomes your performance metrics. You use layout inspectors, you use some UI testing frameworks to get what the idea is. Okay. Okay. Moving ahead. Oops. Yeah. Accessibility. How many of you know that we have loads of friends and family or relatives who don't have the same flexibility like us? We have great 5 senses. Some of them don't have that. Some of them don't have hands. Some of them don't have the speech recognition. A lot of them are autistic in this world, right? If you don't set up your app to have accessibility, it's a very, very bad practice. Please practice accessibility. Please also write test cases. If something breaks, what happens, right? Just एक app, 1,000 million users, not impressive. 1,000 million disabled people who are also in that 2 million, 5 million users base. That's impressive that they're using your app. Okay. Compose has some great APIs across accessibility. Please do go check that out. Okay. By the way, कुछ भी Compose में मैं बोल रहा हूँ, it's all multi-platform supportive now. Okay. Now this particular part, nothing crazy. It's a store. I've written a simple code. How many of you know what back handler is? जिन लोगों ने Compose पे काम करा है. When I press back, it should go back to another screen. It should exit the app. There's also the predictive back gestures in Android 13 and above. Sorry. All of those things can also be now controlled in multi-platform way. How many of you know that when you press back on iOS, it doesn't kill the app? It still remains in memory. I know maybe बहुत सारे ऐसे famous devices हैं जो they keep draining your battery. But if you build something like this, remember battery optimization. So that's why I've shown you this particular code. This code is not for me to explain to you. It's for you to experiment and tell me what you get out of this. Okay. Anyways, moving ahead, this is also back handler. Look at what I've done there. I've written expect. It's in the shared module. Then I've written actual in the Android world and the iOS world or the web world or any other module that looks at my back handling strategies. How many of you go to your browser and press back with your trackpad, gestures and so forth, or you press the back button on the top? Okay, there are some really crazy people here. I don't even do any of that. My webcam, if I look left, it'll go back. I'm just showing off. Okay, anyway, the point is that back handler is now supportive on across all platforms. You don't have to worry about how to build this yourself. Okay, next, I have one simple trick. I have 45 seconds. I just want to see if you know any. Do you see anything buggy over here? This is a Kotlin multi-platform Compose project. It's a music playing app. Any guesses what is wrong here on the screen? It's glitchy, right? Okay, this is iPhone. See, iPhone is really bad that way. If you're building Compose UI. Same thing on Android. Same glitch. Is it better? Smoother? It's one line of change in your Compose UI. Imagine telling it to your Shift friends who are building everything in native. Ki bhai, on Android it's better, but iPhones it's not. Imagine you writing both the sides of the code. That's the inspiration I'm trying to give you. You write your Compose code, you put this focus.property and voila. This becomes much simpler. There are articles for this, don't worry. There are resources at the end that will give you all of this. Okay. I have 3 more slides I just want to quickly go over. Start small, don't migrate everything. Don't die and just don't burn yourself out just because a production app ko mujhe kisi aur pe jana hai. Unless your founders are now saying we have native app, let's go to React. Sorry, come and join JioCinema. Okay, leverage common code. Don't just put everything in just common code कि भाई सब कुछ चल जाएगा क्योंकि common पे रखा है या shared library पे रखा है. It doesn't work like that. You have to be very strategic about how you write test cases also. Okay, next. Promise just one more slide and we'll be good. Okay. Compose is ever growing. The iPhones, the iOS and the web, it's still alpha, but remember, Compose just came out a year and a half back. It's already production ready for a lot of the platforms. It's a few more days and everything will come out of the equation very nicely. Just you have to wait for a few more days. If you can contribute back to the Slack community, happy to introduce you to loads of folks across the community that are working on Compose. Okay, test rigorously. How many of you write unit tests? ठीक है, बाद में मिलना, सबको एक goodie मिलेगा. जो नहीं लिखते हैं, it's a practice for you to start writing tests. The reason I'm showing you all this is all common sense, but when you build something in multi-platform, it becomes more difficult because now there are so many challenges. 10 phones on Android now become 100 across the board. Okay, nothing crazy. Community is your key. Come to DevFest. Come and talk to me later. Go to Kotlin Slack. Go and explore the world with different things. Now, just want to show this as a final note. If you're talking about KMP, if you're talking about Compose, all of this is still possible that you would do in your native day-to-day job. File management, analytics, all this, everything is same. We have built the entire analytics stack on JioCinema on KMP. We are slowly migrating other network libraries, design systems of UI into Compose, shared across iPhones and Android. Okay. Some resources, if you want, you can take a shot. Slides will be available. Okay. I have this quiz that I promised you guys. If you can scan this, I'll wait here for 2 more seconds. Sorry, if I have, yeah. I know I'm already up. It's all flickering here. Bhai likh lo yahan se agla bhi. Okay, cool. If you get 100%, I have a very special goodie that even it's not natively available. JetBrains was very kind enough to send me some custom designs. Okay, one more small quiz. How many of you know what I'm wearing right now? Anyone know what this is? Mascot off? Exactly, you get a hoodie. Okay, but he's a volunteer, so I'll meet you later. नहीं आपको मिलेगा. Okay, the whole point is that there are so many good things out there that the more you go towards Kotlin, the more functionalities open up for you. You're not limited by one language framework. You just have to learn one language, you get benefit across the scope. Okay, if scanning is over, I just want to call out two things, very simple, two friends that have been in this industry. Bloody amazing app. I don't know, how many of you know what RSS readers are? You go to a website, Reddit, go to verge.com, go to Times of India. 1000 websites hain, kaun padega? This smart engineer called Sashi, great friend of mine, he's built this in Compose multi-platform. Beautiful. It's built across Android, iPhones, Android, Pixel, non-Pixel, Samsungs, and so forth. All of those are now supportive of Compose. If you're curious, you can also go to Twine. The name of the app is available on Play Store today. If you want, you can try it out. Give a shout out to Shashi. He's engineer of this and amazingly beautiful app. If you're ever curious ki maine kaise banaya slide or what I've done differently in the slides, some of the learnings are with him actually. Okay. Some of the multi-platform resources, don't worry, no need to click shorts, slides mil jayega. I am just showing you that the starting mein maine aapko ek list dikhaya tha. There were 5 libraries. I was not able to put all of them in one slide. I have to put 5 slides. I'm 5 minutes over. Imagine how many resources are out there on Kotlin multi-platform alone. Okay. Some of the resources, like I said, bahut sare hain. So I've just picked the best of the best. If you want to do different things, if you're building an audio player, video player, or if you're doing something on analytics, banking app or whatever, loads of examples out there. There's a library called, repository called KMP Awesome. Do check it out. Jo main slides mein nahi dikha pa raha hu. You'll get it in 30, 40 pages of readable material. Okay. If you're still curious to start, at the end of this, if you want to do a workshop with me or if you want to just come and connect, Adit, I have this Compose app I want to build in multi-platform. Kuch setup karne ki zarurat nahi, just go to this website, select your libraries, it'll spit out a project for you. Take it from there, okay? And there's also a call out to Rivu, a great friend of mine and a colleague of mine, who is also told, he has a YouTube link that will come out very soon. He gave a DevFest talk which spoke about how we built JioCinema's analytics on KMP. If you're curious, you can go check it out. And with that, thank you folks. By the way, this is my own shot. Okay, light ne khab kar diya. If you look at the slides, I did Gemini meteor showers very recently. I got a very good shot. Yeah. Thank you.